And you could see entrepreneurs go in, buy themselves, some marijuana and smoke it at home to have that same feeling. But for me, the way I've seen it, because I've seen many people who smoked regularly, maybe extensively, they've all been able to quit. While with alcohol, it's so much more difficult because the social pressure is always there.
Great seeing you again, Benny. Where are you calling in from?
Yeah, good to see you too, Robert. I'm in the Netherlands at the moment. I think the last time we spoke, I was in Panama, so that's quite a journey. But I'm spending some time with my parents in the Netherlands, where I grew up, and it's always great to see your childhood environment from through adults' eyes. So I'm learning a lot about myself and about my parents, and I'm just grateful that I get to spend this time with them. So this is kind of the life that I want to live, to be able to come back when I want to and when they need me. So I'm very grateful that I get to do this. So I'm grateful to be on your show again.
Thank you so much. For those that didn't see the episode, Benny travels a lot. He's a digital nomad. He's got his own company via Stoica, where he spreads the message of Stoicism from a personal level and a business level, but also to what we'll talk about today is we share the fact that we have sobriety in common. And what's interesting, Benny, you were the very early on within the first 5 episodes. There were two people from the Netherlands, and I've now got a third guest potentially coming on that's from the Netherlands. And the internet, we have access to billions of people online, but the people that I run into that are entrepreneurs, there's a lot of them from the Netherlands. And the lady that I spoke to, she said to me, and I forget what the population of the Netherlands was, but it was shockingly small. I said, is there something in the water there that makes you all entrepreneurs? Have you noticed any trends like that between people from the Netherlands and solo business owners?
Yeah, we have 18 million people in the Netherlands, so it's a
Yes,
fairly
yes.
it's a like geographically it's a very small country, but we still have a decent. It's very like it's crowded, for the amount of space that we have. But
Oh, I see.
we have always been like a knowledge-based economy. So we have some really good universities, especially we get related to tech and IT. So we have really good universities and knowledge that way. But we've also been outward people. Like we have to move outward. Like we have to learn languages because no one speaks Dutch. So if we don't learn any other language, then who are we going to talk to? But I think that that's where the entrepreneurial spirit comes from. That exploring that and also trying to be a little bit different from the rest. I think that that's something that the Dutch have as well. We want to be a little bit different, and so it's easy when you go abroad, right? Because there's not a lot of Dutch. Although I stumble across them all the time when I travel. I was like, oh, there's a Dutchie, but I think that that's where it comes from. But we are quite entrepreneurial.
As I said in the previous episode, Europeans, obviously, the education level there, when I talk to Europeans, and not to knock Americans, I don't want anybody to get their feelings hurt, but Europeans really have a more worldly view of what's going on. They have a bigger picture. But of course, in our defense, America is a gigantic country. There's so much to know about the United States that we don't often look beyond our own borders because we're gigantic. And I think you made a great contrast, whereas the Netherlands is a smaller country and you all have always been exploratory and had a massive empire at one time where you all touched every aspect of the globe. And I would think that all the contact with all of those cultures had to enrich the knowledge that the people have in the Netherlands.
Yeah, although we didn't have quite the positive influence on all those cultures that we touched, we don't have a. It's not as like rosy, like they call it the golden age. Well, that's from a certain point of view, I
That's
guess. But
correct. That's
and I
correct.
think and real quick, like the
Hmm.
reason why Europeans and the Dutch are more outwardly because we are more dependent on American economy and on what the U.S. does. So if, for example, with elections and policies and things being made, those also affect us. So we have to look more towards the U.S. than the U.S. has to look to us. So I think that that's also a big factor in why we know more. And I just love the U.S. I love to travel there. So I'm be able to go back there once.
So let me start off with this question, since I just left on ambition. Do you see a correlation between hard work, ambition, and people that have a propensity to overindulge in alcohol? Have you ever seen any connection between that being driven?
That's a really interesting, take and look at that ambition and the use of alcohol, because alcohol is, in my opinion, it's a drug to kind of
Hmm.
numb certain feelings. And then, so, for example, with ambition, we can talk about stress, worries, and as an entrepreneur, it sounds really, romantic sometimes, but it's difficult. It's tough. Like if you are not getting clients, if you're not getting the money that you need, if you don't know what to do, if you just hit those obstacles, then it can be really difficult. So I do think that in certain ways there could be that propensity to reach for the bottle and to say, I need to numb myself, especially on the weekends or in the evenings when you just need your mind to just let go and relax. And interestingly enough, like we were building, the company with Brendan and Bryce, and at one point I was just thinking about it 24/7, and I just felt like I didn't have any energy left, and I just didn't feel like that spirit that I had to. And I was working, so I was talking to Brendan about this, and he's been an entrepreneur for a while, and he said like yeah, this is entrepreneurial fatigue, right? Because your brain is on 24/7 thinking about this thing. You're sleeping, sometimes wake up in the middle of the night. So I can see why people would say, I need to relax. I need to get away from this for a while. And then that becomes this stimulant that you need in that life, right? Because especially if you are stuck in that high pressure attitude and motivation that you want to succeed. And that's why it's good to, be an entrepreneur, but also, the Stoics say with moderation, mind your own time, make sure that you relax and take some, time off for yourself.
The first time you had a drink, or the first time you had a drink to excess, did it feel like it was completing something in your brain, like, oh wow, what's this is amazing? Did you have a more of a sensation that the first time?
I think my journey went a little bit different. Like when I look at my family, it's
Hmm.
something that is integral, right? You drink. That's the thing that you have. Like that's what kind of binds us. And I have like from my mom's side and from my father's side, it's pretty much the same. So I think the first time I drank at least some alcohol was I was somewhere around my early teens, right? And this is just at a party, just like you had a little Fanta or Sprite or whatever, and they put a little bit of foam in there, so you get a so you oh look at me. So that's the psychological adaptation of becoming a drinker, right? Because then at one point that's the pose you have. So, and the first time I was drunk was when I was 14, at like a family party, and this is just the family. So I didn't have that feeling as you mentioned, like, oh wow, this is now I'm relaxed. For me it was drinking, then it's go time, then all there's no limits. It's just until tomorrow, maybe then even, so it was a little bit different, my journey from that. But I do get it why people feel that way, because that's why they say after a hard days of work you can grab a beer, because that really psychologically, in my opinion, closes the working day for people. Now I've drank some alcohol, I'm no longer capable to do work, so I'm not going to do it anymore. So it's more of a psychological boundary that people place on their working day.
At what age was your first time that you felt that you got inebriated, where it went beyond just the normal number of drinks?
So the first time was I was 14 like at
Oh
a
wow.
family party. That was the first time I really, and because we were drinking like Bacardi colas, and and just try this, and then at one point you're young, you don't know what it is, and everybody's doing it, so it's like, oh, this is probably normal, right? This is the norm that we have to do. So that was the first time when I my first real recollection of being drunk was at that age. And I don't think it was really that structural at that time, but your mind just sees it as something that is socially accepted, or not even socially
Mhm.
acceptable. But there's this pressure that you have to do it, otherwise you don't fit in. And later, as we get along with the sobriety journey, that's when I realized when you have to say no to people, or not no, but to say that I don't drink, that's when you see how connected it is to society. And the funny thing, and I just wanted to mention that as well. The funny thing is when we talked about those entrepreneurs, and here in the Netherlands, we've had coffee shops for a long time. And coffee shop is not where you get a coffee, but where you get a joint, to smoke some marijuana, and which is perfectly legal here, which has been for many decades. And you could see entrepreneurs go in, buy themselves, some marijuana and smoke it at home to have that same feeling. But for me, the way I've seen it, because I've seen many people who smoked regularly, maybe extensively, they've all been able to quit. While with alcohol, it's so much more difficult because the social pressure is always there. And that's what I've noticed at that beginning when you see your family, when they push it to other people. And again, this is also from, where they grow up. So it's this cultural thing. It's very difficult to get out of it. But that's the first time when I really felt drunk. And that was not the last time, I have to be honest.
So we've talked about the first drink, but I think something key to alcoholism was when was your first blackout? Which a lot of people have never, thankfully, have never experienced one. But how young were you when you had your first blackout?
Yeah, I don't really remember. Like, and this is another factor of drinking
Mm.
extensively for many years that your memory is just gone. I've noticed that now, especially since I've stopped drinking, that so many,
Mhm.
blackouts from what I've had. But the first time I was drunk, as I said, I do remember that vividly. But that first time when I blacked out, I don't know, because at one point it happened so often that it just becomes kind of the norm. And at the beginning, you kind of, especially with your friends, you joke about it. Oh, I can't remember
That's
anything I did
right.
last night. But then the depressing part came the next day when you can't remember, when you don't know what you've done, when you just your mind plays all these tricks on you. So yeah, and I'm happy that many people, like I think you've experienced as well, as you asked the question, when you explain it to people, like, I have no idea what I did. It's like, how is that possible? I've seen you there, you were doing all these things. It's like from like 11 or 10, I lost everything, right? There's no, and then luckily I wasn't a bad drunk. So that is kind of, but your mind puts you in the worst places ever. But yeah, when the blackouts start and when they start more consciously, when you really start to notice them, that's when you start to see that, oh, wait a minute, I've got a problem here.
So when you in a society where it's relatively socially accepted, did you at what stage were you when you realized that maybe your behavior was slightly different from the other people that were drinking around you, where you started to see a difference?
The problem there was that I was surrounded by a group of friends at college
Mm.
that were exactly the same with me.
Oh, yeah.
Well, not well, we were all, as you said, that sporadic problem drinker. And I don't want to like, diagnose any of my friends for them, but if you were to ask them, we were all drinking at the same level. But maybe they were dealing with it in a better way. Like, I don't know. Like, I would wake up again, as I said, depressed and feeling really bad and hungover for days. So I didn't really, and as well, like on my family side, this was all kind of seen as normal behavior. So for me, it wasn't really a question whether this was bad or wrong or good. This is the way it is. If you go out, you can drink and you can, do all these things. But I never drank alone. When I was at home, I never had alcohol at home. I just didn't really like it. But if I started, and then, for me, as you said, it only took one or two, and then that judgment, that first layer just went out of the way, and it was just yeah, everything, anything goes, with drinks wise. And so for me, it wasn't really easy to, as you mentioned as well, like it's a very difficult thing to diagnose because you don't see it as such because it's so ingrained in society. So for me, it was really this introspective journey that I had to make and realize like I don't want to live this way. At one point, that's what I literally told myself. It's like this is not me because I was becoming a different person and I was sensing this anxiety, these worries, and I didn't want to live that way. So it was very difficult to diagnose myself and to realize that this wasn't good because it was so ingrained and so nurtured. I think that for me it was, and I'm thinking whether there's also some genetic parts there, but when I really analyze it, it's more of that nurturing in our group
Hmm.
instead of like that really genetic part. Although I do have the like the addictive behavior. That's something also that I can sense in myself. So yeah, I was fortunate enough, with alcohol that I didn't have that addictive behavior towards it. But when I started, it was let go and just open the floodgates, as they say.
And when you stopped, did you get any pressure from people like, what are you doing, Benny? Why are you putting this down? Because if you're surrounded by friends that are drinkers, obviously, and you flip a switch, what happens next?
That was the most difficult part for me to really stop. Luckily, I had like my sister and my cousin. They stopped as well, so it's nice to have a good example to see that it's possible. Because I was toiling with this for a while, and I lived in Dubai for 5 years. There, it's a little bit more difficult to get alcohol. At least it's more expensive, right? Because it's a Muslim country, and there's not supposed to be any alcohol, but there's a lot of expats there. So you really have to go out of your way. And those last few years that I lived in Dubai, I was pretty much focused on the things that I wanted to do. I was reading and writing a lot, so I wasn't drinking there. But that was before I made that conscious decision to stop drinking. Then I would still occasionally have a drink here or there, and sometimes it went overboard a little bit. But and when you go through this journey, before you make this final decision to stop drinking, you need to have a few of those moments just as reminders, and those things like, oh, I this is not good for me. So when I made that decision, and I went back to the Netherlands to be there with my friend group and my family, there was some surprise, because I was known as, they would call me Benny Drunk. That's kind of like my last name kind of rhymes with that. Benny Vonken, Benny Drunken, something like that.
Oh,
So
wow.
I was known as that person, right? I was known. So when you go back, your identity changes for them. For me, it was fine, but that shock was big for them. So most of them, they would be surprised. And then there were, like, as you go along, and maybe that's something, for later as well, but people was like, oh, I wish I could do that, right? Then suddenly you start hearing those things. But the beginning was like, oh wow, now you're not going to be fun anymore. Like, what are you're going to be boring. You're not going to be, and people would, luckily my closest friends, they just accepted me immediately, said, oh yeah, great job, and just they kept inviting me. So that was fine. But there are definitely some people who start, side-eyeing you, because, and this is from my feeling that I got, sometimes it feels like you are judging them because you quit, and then they feel judged, because you are in a way judging saying that your behavior is wrong. My behavior was wrong. We had the same behavior. So now you are judging me because you made that decision, and you making me feel bad, which is not my, as you said, everybody needs to do what they want to do. At the end of the day, it's your life, and this is my decision to live a better life. So it's very layered when you stop drinking, and then you really see, like, our world is so connected with this stuff, with alcohol, that it's crazy to see it once you stop, and once, if you've experienced this heavy drinking.
So did you notice any pushback in the dating realm when you were like, no, I'm going to have water with lemon?
It's so funny that you mentioned it, because these are the I definitely had that experience where and even with, when you go out for dinner with close friends, there's always that still, like, oh, you're not drinking? Oh, it's just us. And I was like, no, I'm not drinking at all anymore. But with the dating, yeah, it is. I had the same feelings. I felt like, oh, this is a guy who's in control, knows what they want, who has a clear focus, not drinking. That's great, but it isn't, right? And I don't know the statistics either, but it is a social lubricant, right? And it is this where you feel just, you can talk about anything. I can talk about anything freely without having a drink. That's, I guess, my, and I do notice when a conversation works or not. Like, if I have good conversation with anyone, then I can go on and for hours, like, for example, with you, I think we could talk for hours about anything, which is great. But you realize that with social interactions, where it is needed for some people to get over that hurdle and to start talking about whatever they want, and not to feel, having someone or some part of their brain telling you, okay, now it's enough. And so they also need people to be on that same level. At least that's what they think, to do the same. So it is really interesting to see how on different moments in life you just notice that alcohol is involved. It's like when when you cut your finger, you don't notice how often you use your index finger until you have a cut. And this is the same thing when you stop doing something that was such a big part of your life. You suddenly realize how many facets of your life it touches. So that was like, as you started mentioning, that the dating without, as a non-drinker, I had so many experiences of, well, not so many, but I've had, the experiences that I realized, like, yeah, this is different. But also with just, and one quick example, I went for New Year's Eve to Rome, and I was there with some, very close friends and their families, and we sat in this restaurant, and they were drinking wine, and oh, beer. And then they came to me, it's like, what do you want? It's like, do you have any non-alcoholic drinks? Well, we have water, They looked
Did
at
the
me like,
did the piano player stop in the restaurant and
yeah,
everybody
everybody's
looked,
like, what?
what?
And then this was in Italian. Okay, que pasa? And it's like,
Oh my
so
God,
they were
yeah.
all like, no, we don't have any non-alcoholic drinks here. So I was just drinking water, and you do feel a little bit, I do have to be honest. You feel a little bit estranged in a situation like that. Now, luckily, in the Netherlands, they have like such a wide variety of non-alcoholic drinks, alcohol, wine. I even had a non-alcoholic gin tonic, which was a nice little change up because after like and the interesting thing with non-alcoholic beers is I keep drinking them like normal beers. So I saw how fast I was drinking beer, and now you're drinking all of these kind of sodas, which a little in a beer bottle. So it is kind of, at one point I was just like, I'm done. But it is interesting and so such a wide variety of social interactions alcohol is involved, and the dating one is a very unique one, I have to say.
And you just opened the door for me to slay a sacred cow of drinkers. So, um, I don't want to go on a big long story. I'll just get right to the point. But there is a story. Maybe we'll get to it later. Um, a friend of mine who was having some trouble with drinking, and he came to me and mentioned that he was having some trouble. So I assumed he wanted some advice, So, and at the end, and this happens so frequently, where I'll, because I'm very open about my sobriety. I talk about it. If you've known me for 30 seconds, you probably know because that prevents the awkward moment in the restaurant. Because if people like me, which happens sometimes, they'll say, "Hey, let's go grab a beer after work." So I get in front of that really, really early, which is, now it works. Now I'm not in that uncomfortable situation that you described. But this guy said to me, he goes, "Well, I just like the taste of beer." I said, "Okay." I said, "What's your favorite soda?" He goes, "Oh, Dr. Pepper. I love Dr. Pepper." I said, "Okay." I said, "Have you ever sat and drank 12 Dr. Peppers in a row?" And he went, "No." Well, you don't like the taste of beer. You might like the taste of beer, but let's be honest. You're not drinking the beer for the flavor. If you're drinking Dr. Pepper or Fanta for the flavor, I don't know anybody that drinks 12 of them, a case of Fanta. It doesn't make sense. So the longer you're in, and of course we can get into the program a little bit. I won't mention the name, but if you look online, it's very close to the beginning part of the alphabet. I'll say that. That's the best way to say it without saying it. So if you look very close to the alphabet, you've got it. If you're comfortable, share your rock bottom and let us know what you did next. Did you go to the program? Did you get a mentor? What was the next step of the journey?
So yeah, that's a very impactful story to tell. And one thing that I think that people who aren't ready to make that change, who have something happen to that, they would just step over that initial shock and just tell it as a funny story. Oh, I hit a trash can.
Yes,
So it's also
yes.
this moment where you need to be ready for it. Because if I think back, I've had many stories that should have been, wake up calls where you wake up on the street. I've been woken up by a police officer a few times, the Netherlands and Spain. I've woken up in front of the wrong building. Many of these happens where you just like, you should be ashamed, but then you go back to your friends like, oh, look at this happened. So you make it into something funny while you deal with it internally that it's horrifying, it's depressing, you feel really bad about yourself. So I've had many of those things. And for me, what really made the difference was, and I was married, like my marriage ended, so we were divorced. But when I got married, I stopped drinking as excessively because I suddenly had too much to lose. I felt like drinking is a big risk. I don't know what's going to happen. It's always this thing that goes out of control. So I stopped drinking as heavily. I remember one day my ex was like, "Oh, I would like to see you, drink, the way you did before." So okay, but I'm gonna be sick for a few days. So I did. I drank and didn't get really nice, and I got sick for a few days. And she was like, "Oh, I'm sorry," and okay, but that's fine. This is I just wanted to experience it as well. But I remember when we broke up and I went back into that heavy drinking spell, and I was living in a hotel in Dubai at that point because we were still looking for places, or I was still looking for a place to live. And I woke up that next day and I didn't have any like. Well, I went to a brunch, the story, that you drink too much and it was like unlimited alcohol as well. So that was not really the best situation. All the heavy liquor, which is something that I can't take anyway, and it just goes downhill real fast. So I woke up the next day and it was just, hot, sweating, but also this feeling of like, what did I do? And this isn't Dubai. So if you do something bad there, you don't know what's going to happen, right? It's a little bit trickier.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I just like, okay, I've lost my phone. I couldn't find my phone. I found it hours later. It was just fumbled somewhere in the sheets, but I was too afraid to look for it because I was too afraid to open it and to see what was going on. I woke up, there was vomit, I've everywhere, well not everywhere, just in certain places where you don't want it to be, and my head was splitting, part. I had a humongous headache. I used to have migraines, so this was kind of similar to that, and it was just horrible. And I just stayed in bed for a few hours, didn't want to move. Just as if I kept still, then everything was fine. The bed sheets were closed, so I was staying in this dark room for hours until I suddenly had to go, to the toilet, and you started getting a little bit thirsty and all that stuff. And then I walked around, the bathroom was a complete mess. And I just looked in the mirror and I said, this is not going to be my life. It takes taking a hard, deep look at the mirror for most people to get to that moment. But you have to be ready for it, because you can spin anything the way you want. But
And
unless you're not ready for it, then you're not going to make those steps. So for me, that was the moment. I looked at myself. I saw it was just a complete mess. And even in that moment, I said, okay, let's just face things. Because that's another thing with alcohol. You don't want to face the fact. You don't want to face reality. And I figured, let's just face it. Let's start cleaning everything. Let's find my phone. Let's just open it, see what's happening. And that's what I did. And after that, I didn't go to any program. I kind of created a program for myself, I guess. And that's when I started really diving into the reading, into the philosophy. But one of the first things I said is like, okay, no more alcohol, get physically fit, eat well, take care of yourself, all of those things. So it was because I was not not an individual drinker. I wouldn't drink at home. I was a very heavy social drinker, and then I would just fly off the wall. I kind of became a hermit for a while. As I said, I cannot deal with this. I'm not ready for it, right? I can't really put myself in those situations because I don't have the strength to do so. And I was kind of okay with it in Dubai because my social life was a little bit secluded. So I think that was a really good testing ground for me as well. That was kind of fortunate that I was there. And I think that this is also another thing that people who really want to quit, but they don't, is because they get that feeling of being ostracized. They know that if they think about the steps that they have to do, they will know that you have to let go of some people. You will know that some people will, as we talked about earlier, would either judge you or just say, no, okay, then I'm not going to call you anymore because you're not going to be fun, or I'm going to feel bad about myself seeing you not drink. So for me, that was kind of like as I said, I think I should have had like 10 or 12 or 20 moments where I hit rock bottom, because that's what I've had. But that was the moment where it really opened my eyes and I was ready for it. And before, I always had excuses to say, okay, I don't drink because of this, I don't drink because of that. And I was like, no, I don't drink because I don't want to drink, because it's not who I am. And that's where I didn't, that was pretty much the last time. Well, I had one more drink. And this is, the reason why this is another question that people ask, especially with Stoicism, right? Temperance is one of those things. And they say, well, you don't drink anymore. That's not temperance. That's not moderation. And I remember going in just this was the day the lockdown started with COVID. I was in a hotel with a friend that we were having some gin tonics, like 2 or 3. And that's the moment where I felt like I wanted to continue, right? I wanted to keep going. And I was like, "Ooh, this is dangerous." And my friend luckily stopped me from drinking. And at 2 or 3 hours, I just started getting this incredible headache. It started to get. So that's where I figured it's either 0 or 1. And I don't know if you remember Matthew Perry, like the one who was the Chandler from Friends. He made a comment that really blew my mind, but it really made sense to me. He's like, he was asked the same thing. It's like, so why don't you drink just a little bit? He's like, my boundary is between 0 and 1. That's where it is. It's either 0 or 1. Those are my 2 options. So the moderation is at 0 because 1 goes to everything. So that's the same for me. And it might not happen all the time, but because it can happen, it gives me anxiety. Even before going to a party, I remember people inviting me to parties. I would be worried for 2 weeks. If the party was in 2 weeks, I would be worried going there because I would think, oh, can I control myself? I've got to control myself. This is a party with these kind of people. And I knew that the chances for me going overboard were so high that I was just filled with worry. And now I can go to a party and I'm, relaxed and okay, we'll see what happens. But so it wasn't like my rock bottom wasn't like this specific really big thing because I should have had many, but it was the moment that was yeah, a very significant moment for me, like mentally, where I was really struggling. And I remember that day vividly, just not, turning on the lights, moving, just being there. And that's the moment when I was ready for to say, okay, this is it. I'm not going to touch this anymore.
And that's fine. It doesn't have to be this dramatic,
Yeah.
this dramatic moment. And there's a lot to unpack with what you said. I want to go back to something you said early about it. You said you had lost your phone and then you were concerned about looking at your phone. Explain to the non-drinkers out there, because I know what you were talking about. It made, as soon as you said the phone, I knew what was, what the concern was on your mind. But why would you be concerned about looking at your phone the day after you drank?
Well, if you don't remember what you did, the
That's
phone, especially now, it's going to give you the answers.
yeah,
And
texting the ex at 3 a.m. and I love you, all those things.
or even like I would go to darker places. I would go like, oh, you did something wrong, you hit this person, or you did this, or
Yeah.
the police are looking for you, and all of that stuff. And one of the other, the rock bottom moments was when I was in college. I was working, and I had the same. I wouldn't touch my phone. Later, I heard that my coworkers and friends, they called all the hospitals in the area to see if I was still alive, because I was too afraid to touch the phone. I
Oh
didn't
my
answer. I
God.
didn't see the messages, so they were like all worried. And my boss, luckily, he was a great boss, and I was always punctual and always there. And usually, I would go to work with when I was hungover. Even I could kind of manage that. Still difficult to struggle 12-hour shifts. But I was in that college years. When you're in your 20s, you're still a little bit more flexible and resilient. But that was like a really bad one. So, and I spoke to my boss. He was like, "Don't ever let this happen again," because we were all worried. But we'll give you a second shot. So sometimes you need some, help from people as well. But yeah, the phone is a that was a I've always had that moment when you just wake up and it's like, I don't want to touch it. I just don't want to see, what's what the messages are.
So, did you feel that your personality was shifting? Did you become a different person when you drank?
Almost definitely. And this is also, again, like really short backstory. I have three sisters and I have a lot of female cousins. So I was mainly around women. And then when I went to college, that suddenly, the soccer team, the football team and all that stuff. So I was suddenly surrounded with men, and I didn't know how to act. I didn't know how to be like, oh, what do I do to be accepted by men? So with drinking, I would just go boisterously out, and I was wearing a mask. And now later on, as I did a lot of reflection, I realized that that wasn't me. I was altering who I was to fit in, and alcohol was the power tool to do that. I mean, we would drink like it took me like I studied tourism, which we and for was a 4 years college degree. It took me 6.5, and alcohol is one of the major roles. Played a major role in that for me to take that long, because we would be at 11 in the morning and say, let's go bowling, and bowling would be drinking. So we would do all of these things. And I guess sociologically they would classify you different when you're a student, right? Because and at least that's some study that I've read back in the day. Like if you're a student, you won't necessarily be classified as an alcoholic, because it's kind of normal student behavior, at least here in the Netherlands. So this was normal. We just, oh, this is normal. But then we talked to other students. I was like, no, like you were just, that was just your group. The rest of us were just, we finished in 4 years.
That's right.
So it did change who I was. And then it was like I'm kind of like a calm person, but then I would just stand on the bar, stand on the stage, do all these crazy things. And I kind of enjoyed myself. It was nice to let loose. I'm always very careful of being in control of myself. So it was kind of nice to be that way. But now I look back is that I was spending so much energy that I didn't have, because I'm an introvert, but if I can connect with people, I can be very extrovert. So I can be, but then alcohol would make me such an extrovert that apart from the depressing factor that I would have the next day, I would just be exhausted because I was doing something that wasn't necessarily who I was. So you're right, that if it changes who you are fundamentally, then that's a big red flag. And I think that that's why I also felt like I needed it in those social events. And now, like for example, I had a birthday party the other day, and at 11 p.m. I was like, I'm done. I'm going home. Where normally I would be there until like 2 or 3 in the morning, but now I was like, I'm physically, mentally done with having conversations with people, and I need to leave. And that's what I did. So Now I know more of like, this is who I am, my boundaries, and alcohol would just remove all those boundaries and say, nope, you got to stay and you're going to keep drinking and you're going to have a good time, good time in quotation.
As you went through that, after that year of retooling, after you shut down, what steps did you take to reintegrate, to kind of sprout as this new individual sans alcohol?
Yeah, when I hear other stories from other people, it feels like I've had a little bit of an easier road because because I was drinking kind of forcefully. Like I didn't want to drink, and I felt like I had to. So I didn't feel like I had to reshape myself. I felt like I had to reinvent, reconnect with myself, and I felt like I was kind of releasing that shell away and being able to be who I was. So it felt more like in kind of a similar way, I guess. So, but maybe I see it differently. I felt like I can finally be myself, and that's what I
Oh,
did in
fantastic.
those years. Because like I said, I was putting on this mask of being someone else and trying to fit in, and I'm not as strong-willed to fight all the peer pressure. I still struggle, for example, with food. If someone gives me like, "Oh, eat this," sweet cake, I say, "Yeah, okay, that's fine." And so there's still a lot of work to be done. I guess that's life, but it's for me it was really to reinvent myself. And then when you go to the social things, the social interactions, the first times was really a practice of who I was and setting those boundaries. So if people were to say, "Oh, just one or two," is like, "Nope, I'm not drinking." So at the beginning, it was mainly for me, and I had to be strict, and also to be like. That's why I love this conversation being here. Is like to be open about it, because some people they are embarrassed to talk about it, but I think if you are open to talk about it and you are, then you can really face it yourself, because it's easy when you tell it yourself, but if you speak to other people, it's confronting. So people ask me, it's like, "Oh, why did you make this decision?" And at the beginning, I was kind of hesitant, but I really started to just explain, "This is who I am. I've got nothing to hide. If you want to ask me questions, go ahead." And so the reintegrating into social life, because I was in Dubai and I was really focused on what I wanted to do, I had maybe two or three friends, maybe four, and I would meet up with them, sporting events or reading or just having a coffee. I wouldn't go out to bars. I didn't really like them there anyway, so that was fine for me. And I was just meeting people at different settings, and that was something that really helped me. And as you said, I really enjoyed being in bed at 9 or 10. So I started to do the things that I needed instead of what I expected people to want me to do. So that for me was the biggest change, to really put myself first. And then if people wanted to meet up, I would set the boundaries. Like, let's meet for lunch. Let's meet for a coffee. Let's go for a bike ride. Let's go for other settings where alcohol wasn't involved. And not to really put too many stoic things in here, but Seneca says like at one point, if you really you can reach a point where you can be surrounded with people who are puking drunk and puking on the floor, and you can still be yourself. That's the last stage. If you can still be there, but you need to recognize where you are in that journey, and you shouldn't put yourself in situations where you can fall back into, like you said, with the relationships, when things get tough, that's when you can fall back. So you need to be very careful where you put yourself, and that's what I did. And yeah, I think I was kind of lucky. I used the environment to my benefit where I was. And then when I went back to the Netherlands, that's where I had to make those conscious decisions. No, I'm not drinking. No, I'm not drinking. And that's something that you need to remind yourself. That what I had to remind myself of. So I really became myself more, and I feel more, yeah, complete as who I am.
And you've been on a lot of podcasts. I was doing a little bit of research earlier. Obviously you have your podcast, but you've been on other people's shows, including mine. I wouldn't think that you would have been on podcasts and talking to people back when you were drinking. That person emerged later. Would that be fair to say?
Oh yeah, most definitely. And I wasn't even thinking about doing any of this stuff. And that's the crazy thing. Like I see myself as an introvert. That's how I feel. But again, there are moments where I feel like I want to share. And this feels like kind of a sense of duty. And some people say, "Oh, you're sharing too much." And well, I to be honest, haven't had many people say that. And maybe some people feel like the things that I say, they feel judged by that, or but this is all about me, right? This is just me sharing, and I that's also part of my process to get it out and to know who I am, and being able to speak to it to other people is really helpful. So, no, I think it is. I like it. I enjoy it, right? And I also feel like it can help people, as you said. more people need to know about the impact of alcohol in our lives and what it does to us, and it can do it in a very sly, sneaky way that people don't even realize. And as you said, I've had I've crawled to, I've had too many lucky moments, and I said, like, I've faced, I've tempted fate for too many times. I don't think, I don't want to do that anymore. But it could just take one bad episode, and then, that's it. Your life, the way you planned it, is gone. And I think that that's why it is a responsibility and a duty to share this story to people. And then maybe I've had many people say, I want to quit, or how did you do that? And you just talk about it. But I think that that is important to do.
And with Via Stoica, are you consciously making a pivot there to promote aspects of it towards the community that want to be sober, or is it just already kind of written into the Stoic lifestyle, or are you kind of doing some alternate branding to try to attract people that may be struggling with something like that?
So I do promote myself as a Stoic life and sober coach. I
Sober
haven't
coach.
had anyone like to do the sober coaching with, but it is part of Stoicism with the temperance, the virtues. So if you don't want to lose that reason and logic, that first layer of your brain, you don't want to get rid of that one, because that's where it's places. So it is very ingrained with it. And in the coaching itself, it is all about asking those questions about who you are, the why, so you can get really close to that as well. So it's all about helping people live better. So if people have these issues, and that's where your own experience, someone said you are your first client, so you need to go through certain things to be able to help other people. And I think that that's also where I really want to help people to face these things and to say it's okay to stop drinking. And especially for those earlier stages, because I don't know what it's like in the later stages. I'm not qualified for that. At least that's not how I feel I'm qualified. But especially for those in the earlier, with the social, the problem drinkers, and a lot of people there, I know that there's a lot of people with issues about that, where they're struggling and they just say, like, this is not who I am. And it is difficult to recognize it, right? Because it doesn't happen like all the time. It's just in these specific moments. And I do feel like that's where big strides can be made in society. Just show like this is not normal. It seems normal, it might seem because you are in these groups, but this is not going to be helpful for your life unless you're lucky, because it's if you're drinking, you got to have a lot of luck to not have like these big things happen to you.
How do you, as a Stoic coach, reach those young men who are probably the least likely to reach out to you because they don't know they need you. They don't know what they're missing out of. I would assume you're getting a lot of men that are kind of coming to these not later life, but midlife and pre-midlife epiphanies. But really, these young men, if that message can be shared with them, that could prevent all of that stuff that we had to go through and learn the hard way. Some people have to learn the hard way, but how is there a way to reach these young men and try to make sure they get on the right path?
Yeah, and I think most people learn the hard way, right? That's the kind of, because you're not going to say when you're at the top of the hill and now you're going to, yeah, I'm going to change my life because I'm not doing well. So that's the moment where you need to, when you're at the bottom. And one of the things that's why I've been trying to go on as many podcasts as I can to get in front of many different audiences. There was a really nice podcast, the Gen Z Stoic. So that's that younger
Oh,
generation. And
fantastic.
it was really nice to see that they're doing, these kind of things. And yeah, we're putting ourselves out there as much as we can to share these things. Like on X, we have these conversations, and there's a lot of women out there as well who are identifying themselves as Stoics, but
Oh,
also have
wow.
these
Okay.
issues, right? Yeah, so who also need, because the problem with alcohol, there's a lot of shame involved, so it's not something that you want to like share with the rest of the world. I have a problem, right? That's something that we don't really do as human beings. You're not putting that on an Instagram account. But so no, we're trying to get out there as much as we can to share this message, because as you said, and also to lead by example. That's why I really want to share these stories, that people say it's okay to share these stories. What people say, oh, you sure you want to talk about this? How you're not thinking about the repercussions. Is like, well, I've made my life better. What
Yes.
repercussions I've learned. I'm learning from my mistakes, I'm learning from my past behavior, that it's not the way I want to be. So getting that stigma removed from sharing your story and being vulnerable is important towards men,
That's right.
especially because it's a stigma for men to talk about yourself, to be vulnerable, to share that things are not going well, because we are naturally inclined to solve problems, and if we have a problem, we'll just keep it quiet, fix it, and that's it. But we need help. So I think that's important to share. So setting that example and trying to get in front of as wide of an audience as I can is one of the ways that I feel I can make even if it's as small as different, even if you can change one person's life, then I think that that's worth it.
And I need to learn more from you about X. Surprisingly, the Free Time Mastermind group, although I hardly interact with X, I think it has more followers. I just recently discovered that because I don't look at X very often, but I was like, wow, where did all these people come from? I wasn't really mind. I only have maybe half of the videos up there. So now I'm going to make a more concentrated effort. And you and I talked about X before when you came on. And yeah, that's I guess because I'm kind of a long format video guy, I don't quite understand. And maybe that's a generational thing too, you know. People usually of my generation, we're Facebookers. Instagram mystifies me as well. But help the audience find you as a sober coach and as a stoic coach. Let's get all of the places. What are the best ways to reach out to you and to find you online?
So it changed a little bit from the last time I was on because we now put everything under the umbrella of Via Stoica. So if you go to viastoica.com, you can pretty much find all the places where I'm at. But for example, on X, which I've only used like for the last couple of years, but it's kind of like a playground of social media, so you can test your things, which is really nice. And people can find me there as a Benny underscore Via Stoica. I used to be the Stoic Padawan, so if you see that name there, I still like that name, but we really moved it all to the Via. Even the podcast used to be Street Stoics, now it's the Via Stoica podcast. So if
Yes.
people want to listen to our episodes there, but I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook, so people can find me there. I think if you Google, my name Benny Vonken, then you'll probably find me, or Benny Via Stoica. You'll see everything. But viastoica.com is really the central hub of where we put everything.
Did you have to go through a lot of hand wringing over the rebranding? Because I watched your posts about that, and I think we're connected on multiple places. So I'm always, wow, I got my eye on you, man. I'm watching you. But no, I saw you putting the kind of the note out there that you were going to rebrand the podcast. What was this decision about that, and how was that making that transition? Because obviously any big decision like that has got to be a little nerve-wracking.
It was, and I think the interesting thing about social media is people have a short attention span, so
Mm.
you can make a lot more different changes than you think. We was like, oh, it's going to have this massive impact, but people are kind of, yeah, that sounds normal. For us, the main reason was because it just smoothed out communication. We had the Be Stoic community, Street Stoics, all these different kind of things, and now and people were getting confused. So it made sense for us to do it, and we're still early in our journey. So we figured this is the right moment to do it, and it really helped us, the three of us, with Bryce and Brendan, to really focus on one central path that we're going. So yeah, there was a lot of decision making in the background. We did a lot of thinking about it, but at the end of the day, it was the logical decision to make, and to really put it all in one, with one brand, and just communication wise, it makes it so much easier for us and to the people around us.
And that's great that it went smoothly like that, especially because I only have one person to make a decision. I look in the mirror and say, hey, what do you think of
Yeah.
so sometimes I have goofball ideas that I wish I had somebody to check me on my bad ideas. But that's great that you guys were able to collaborate and come to this rebranding decision. I asked you this before, and I know the answer probably hasn't changed, but for those that haven't seen that episode with us yet, who is your ideal client? What person do you think could come to your organization and get the maximum impact? I mean, I know your doors are open for everybody, but there has to be obviously some ideal, perfect client that you feel like you can really make a huge splash with.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, as you go online, you can see your ideal client pass by left and right, and the metrics from a podcast, on Buzzsprout, they show you. So we are looking at between 25 to 55. It's the age gap is
Oh, wow.
it's pretty big, but it's mainly for people and especially men. The demography is more towards men who are at the certain pivotal moments of their lives, changing with careers, changing with, for example, relationships, moving, all of these kind of really big moments of their lives. That's the people who really look out, who reach us to ask for some guidance, for some coaching, but we also see that on the spaces that we hold. Like we've had a very tight strong community there, and people are very vulnerable in those spaces, and it all kind of comes down to these moments that they are not in the right place, and they need some change in some direction, and that's where we help with the coaching.
Leave us with some final wisdom of a Stoic. You've got some great Stoic quotes, so help us on our journey for the rest of the day today.
Well, I wanted to touch on the honesty, right? The rigorous honesty, and as you said, don't don't lose your job. But the rigorous honesty needs to start with yourself first. You need to be rigorously honest to yourself, not
Yes.
necessarily to other people. But if you can't tell yourself the full truth, then you are not taking that final step, and then you can see how you can communicate to others. And then a quote came to mind from Marcus Aurelius to kind of to round it off in that sense is, you have to be able to be ready when someone asks you, what's on your mind, to speak the truth fully, because you've got nothing to hide. And if you're honest to yourself and you're living well, even in the past you've done your things, but if you're living well in the moment and someone asks what's on your mind, you should be able to just say it immediately, what's on your mind, because your mind should be pure in that sense. But hey, that's that's still maybe that's a few more steps down the road, but that's kind of what we're practicing as well, to being honest with yourself, and then honesty to the rest will follow.
Fantastic advice, Benny. We appreciate you. Thank you for coming on a second time. We'll have to do a part 3 later on down the road. We'll check on each other's journey.
That would be awesome. And thanks for having me on again, especially on this topic. I think it is something that people need to talk about more. And I think it's great that, we had this conversation.
I'm very grateful. Thank you so much for your time. Have a good day, Benny. Thank you for joining us on the Free Time Mastermind podcast. I'm your host, Robert Gaines. To support the channel, please click like, comment, subscribe, and share this episode. The book Scintilla, The Ultimate Guide to Generating Business Ideas, Products, and Services, is now available on Amazon. It's available as an ebook, softcover, and hardcover. Please find the link to the Amazon page in the description, as well as other links relevant to this episode.